I want to go into this subject that we're on. The infallibility of God's Word. And I'd like to approach this tonight with this in mind. America in the past 40 years has given itself over to a spirit of compromise, of wanting to change the American society and the country as a whole. And I think it's now, after this tragedy in New York City on September the 11th, I think it's now beginning to become evident that this sellout, this liberal spirit, this so-called changing America has not been for the better of America. It's went on for about 40 years, we will say, in the rough. But it's brought in a category of people who no longer appreciate the country, the flag, nor the God that actually founded this nation. And we're going to prove that by prophecy tonight. And if I could just speak to every atheist, evolutionist, unbeliever that exists tonight in America. They've been busy for the past number of years. They've made their speeches. They worked hard to try to de-Christianize America. In so doing, they've saw through it that to the immigration facilities, that very few people coming from areas of the world where they could be Christians, even in a fundamental belief, those people have not been allowed to immigrate here. They brought in every other kind of a belief or non-belief that is scattered throughout the globe. This is why we have tonight, and some of the statements that I make, I'm not pointing my finger at any particular Muslim person. You might be living in America tonight. You might be tapped into this. You might want to know what we're saying here. But I can say this. I can remember the time when I never heard the word Muslim believer even mentioned in the overall structure of America. It was never even mentioned in our schools, because America was not overrun by all this mixture. America has always had a lot of unchurch-going people. That didn't mean, brothers and sisters, that they were not Americans. They grew up in an environment, in an atmosphere, to appreciate the country they was born in. And when I look back in the early days, we'll say in the 1800s, when the Irish came here to help build the Western Pacific Railroad, America was short on labor. Even from the Orients, Chinese, the Orientals, they volunteered to come and work. And many of those Oriental people never went back to the country where they came from. They stayed. They later become American citizens. In so doing, they learned to speak English. While it was always, yes, in a brogue way of speaking. But they thought enough of America, the country, they wanted to stay here. And I have to say, it took an immigrant type of people to make America in its early beginning to what it was. But there has been an influx of people that have come into America in the last number of 40 years. That don't mean every one of them came with an anti-attitude. But they did come with mixed beliefs of religion or atheist or everything else. And the reason I say this tonight, the infallibility of God's Word, I challenge any atheist or any kind of a critic of the Bible. You show me any book in this world that your kind have written that can predict time, conditions, 2,000 or 2,500 years in advance. You can't do it. You can't even create a drop of water. But many of you have created drops of water which are tears in the eyes of believers. Now think of that. It's your anti-American things you've said that causes believers to cry. And would to God they didn't have to sit and listen to this stuff. We today have in our universities professors of nothing Muslim professors. They came here to help tear down America what it used to be 100 years ago. They want to put in their modern stinking philosophies and educate the young generation of American people, which is a mixed culture. And if I say some things tonight, brothers and sisters, that you might say that I am anti-racial, I am not an anti-racial, but I've got sense enough to know there is no such a thing that you can bring races of people from the ends of the earth with all kinds of culture and dump them in a basket and expect that everything's going to go all right. It's not. Sooner or later, one culture has to override the other. And you just well make up your mind it's going to be that way. Time and history has proved it. There's never been a society that can coexist with multiple ideas. Sooner or later, one has to come out on top. And that's why I have to say, it's a shame that America has in the last 40 years became an anti-this and an anti-that. And we produce students off of the college campuses. They really don't even know America. They were born here. But they live just like brothers and sisters, like they live out of hell. Some of them with college degrees don't even know what a handkerchief is. Now that's a figure of speech. But if you can understand just what I mean, they think just about that dirty, about that no care. They don't seem to care for anything. I got a letter there that Claudine brought me tonight. When I'm done preaching, I'm going to read it. It's now beginning to become evident that sooner or later, this anti-American philosophy that has been bred into the American brain of youth is going to run into problems one of these days. It's already running into it in certain places where they meet, we will say, ex-soldiers, Marines, those that fought in wars and battles and suffered. And I have to say tonight, there is no atheist, no scientist, no politician that's ever wanted to help tear America down that can deny the infallibility of God's Word. Now let me go into this tonight as I was in this morning. Daniel had that dream. He lived during the time of the Babylonian Empire. I'm not going to go into all the historical background, but these characters today, they want to say this book is just a book of mythology. It is not. It's a book that is true. It's based on principles, facts of life, and God is the author of it. When we come on down to the second beast, history that's written proves that it was the Medo-Persians. Keep in mind, civilization, progress of mankind, all started in the Middle East. Your world empires started there. And as time began to move out of that, then we come into the third beast, the Grecian Empire. We can say they were just between the edges of Asia and Eastern Europe. But they came the greatest in that hour. They did bring education to a vast area of the world in that hour. That's why Alexander the Great built, we will say, an educational city at the mouth of the Nile called Alexander, Egypt. Many of the rich sent their students, their children, there to get an education. But finally, brothers and sisters, Daniel's vision, or dream, spoke then, and he saw this last beast rise up. Now I say to the atheists and the rest of them, to prove to you this book is true, we know by what history has been written about it, that was pointing to the rising of the Roman Empire. Again, we come to a city empire. Rome. Now this is in Europe. The vast area of, we will say, old barbarian Europe. The Gauls, pagans, heathens, barbaric, no education, ruthless, bloodthirsty. Rome existed for hundreds of years, a city. And I've read the beginning of Rome. If you want to know what kind of people made up Rome back 800 BC, it was the renegades, the offscouring from Eastern Europe and Asia. As time progressed, civilization moves, constantly going west. As the sun rises and sinks in the west, so did time and progress and everything. But Rome began we will say, a bunch of barbaric crooks, renegades from all the other societies that left and came. Finally, Rome became the beginning of something. By the time we come in then Rome began to come into the hour of, we will say, its importance. I have to say tonight, Daniel's dream hit it right on the head. He saw this Roman beast rise up. He described this head, how it later had 10 horns. He saw its body. He didn't give it a lot of description. But he saw that Roman beast system, how it existed all out through time. And brothers and sisters, that was Rome. And the reason I have a purpose in bringing this out tonight, anybody that wants to go read Roman history cannot deny the fact that the Bible had not prophesied it. There was no other contemporary city that ever rose that excelled or beat Rome. And Rome ruled and conquered and subdued. And Rome time, we come to the time of Christ, up to 200 years thereafter, Rome became the modern city. It became a welfare state. And the one thing that I look at America tonight, in some philosophies, America has captured and took up the same picture. Rome in its latter eras of time, it became a city where they embraced every religion that have been embraced by the multitudes of people they've conquered. Wherever you went, you found an altar or some kind of a statue to some kind of a deity that Rome knew that existed somewhere in their vast domains. They did that because they wanted to try to unite and hold their society together. Well, look at America for the past 40 years. Have we not opened up to every kind of a racial religion? Why is the Muslims here? Why are the Hindus here? Why are the Shintos here? All because we became a modern Rome. We've taken the same philosophy. Now, when we look at this prophecy about this fourth beast, it continues on through time. And I've got a little background here. And if you think I'm wrong, you get a history of the old world and the rise of Rome. And I want to say this tonight. I'm going to show you how accurate Daniel's vision is. You are all born and raised here in a modern nation. It was cut out of the wilderness of a newfound continent. But when Daniel's prophesied in the 12th chapter that in the last days such and such would be, when we come down to the 4th verse, but thou, O Daniel, shut up the words. How long this book, 12th chapter book of Daniel, has been closed to the understanding of theologians. They did not know where it fit, nor how. But I want to show you, brothers and sisters, a little of the historic of Rome when it ruled and dominated the vast areas of Europe. I've said before, progress advanced slowly. From the advancement of civilization in the Middle East, it comes into Europe. But I have to say, the advancement of civilization was not of an extraordinary change. Because, brothers and sisters, they still burnt candles. There was no electric lights. So we can say the system of making lights, the lamps themselves, or the candles, how they were molded, what their colors were, or the shapes, the molds of the lamps and such, those things might have become modernized. How they traveled, they still either walked by foot, horseback, or we will say by carriage pulled by some kind of an animal. The progress of man moved very slow. But nevertheless, Rome rose, and she ruled the world. Christianity was born. And there's no need of me going into all that kind of history. But to show you to how accurate and precise this book of prophecy is. When this Roman beast system reaches a certain part wherein that the pagan systems of the Roman government have reached out and embraced Christianity as another religion to be recognized, that was the beginning of the breakdown and the spiritual fall of, we will say, early Christianity. After a while, as the generations came on to fill its gaps, Christianity has become embedded into the, we will say, the framework of Rome. And by the time we come to 500 AD, there is beginning to rise another horn, which was not like the 10 horns, the geographical countries of Europe, but this was the papal horn, the papal power of the Pope, still coming from Rome. And from 500 AD to 1500 AD, for 1,000 years, the Roman Empire was ruled, controlled, and subdued by the power of the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic system. I challenge any historian, atheist, scientist, prove it otherwise, because I've got the Roman history. And it gives you the dates, the periods, the downfall, the uprisings. And for 1,000 years, no emperor, no king of Europe in all of these horns dared to rise and to contest the Pope. That's why that beast was to be a different beast. Now when it come into about 1500, by now, brothers and sisters, the New World has suddenly been discovered. Well, what's the New World going to have to play into this prophetic picture? Well, as far as advancement, about the only, we will say, technological advancement that there had been, a fellow by the name of Gutenberg had invented the printing press. Up till that time, whatever means of communication, such as news, traveling, had to be printed much by hand and stuff. It had to be slow. But the progress of it was very slow. But when they come up with the printing press, we can say this: that was the first technological advancement in any scientific manner Europe has produced. So by the time the New World is discovered, the knowledge gets back to Europe. Now then, this wilderness, vast continent that you and I live in today, it had no other government here. We just had the Indians. There was nobody here handing the pilgrims, the pioneers, the adventure seekers, and all of them a welfare check. People came here expecting one thing, that sooner or later somewhere they would find a fortune or they would be able to build a new home. And this world became the beginning of a new nation. And to prove to you and show how accurate and prophetically wise it is in the Bible, by the time, brothers and sisters, we came all the way from 1600 to 1700, we get our early New England colonies begin to be established. Then from 1700 to 1800, we have the Revolutionary War, in which these colonies wrest their freedom from the old mother country of England. Europe at that time, brothers and sisters, is not advancing very much in the sense of technology. Now, other than war, political upheavals, and such, I've got it written down here what Europe was known by through a long period of time. If you find me different, you go prove it. The world's greatest poets came out of Europe. Playwriters, Shakespeare. Classical music, Bach, Beethoven. There's another one, I can't pronounce it, but I'll say it, Tchaikovsky. The opera houses were known all over the world. Only the wealthy could go and sit and enjoy the music of classical music. All the way from Czechoslovakia, these musicians rose in their periods of time. Their music became played, rehearsed all over the world. Paintings Many of these paintings that came up in those eras of time are sold in European auctions today to $1 million, $1.5 million to $2 and $3 million a painting. Michelangelo, and there was a Spaniard. I used to know what his name was, because when we was in Spain, I saw some of his paintings. My point is this. That's what Europe, the old world, was known by for many, many decades and centuries. And to get an education, you learn some of this stuff. I can remember when Shakespeare was referred to in American schools. Not that you had to memorize Shakespeare, but it was a play that seemed to fit in part of our literature. And above all of that was their wars that kept them going. Finally, there came such a modern invention. They called the steam engine, invented in England. This steam engine, though small in its original makeup, was one of the most modern advancements that had ever been made in the European continent. America is on this side, slowly growing out of the wilderness. What's America got coming to her? We will find it in the Bible in a minute. As that little steam engine began to be manufactured in a large way, it wasn't long, brothers and sisters, they got the idea. We'll take the sails off of the ships now and we'll put a steam engine in it and we'll prepare this thing and propel it across the oceans. Modern travel began to advance. Then they began to put the steam engine in the form of a locomotive and they began to build railroads across Europe. This was the beginning of man's entering another era. We're now between 17 and 1800. People in Europe began to travel to and fro like they had never done before, only by horse and carriage. Europe had made their fancy carriage, and you can find some of them today in some of the museums that they became known by, because that was their progress. What was made 200 years prior, that had a certain style, a certain fashion. But 200 years later, it still had four wheels, but was just more modern. But my point is this. Technology advanced very slow. By the time we come through 17 into 1800, Europe has produced this. Ships are now prowling the seas, propelled by steam. Trains are traveling across Europe, propelled by steam. But let's look into this country. This little country, hewed out of the wilderness. What's it going to become? And I'll have to say, I'll challenge any atheist, school teacher, whoever you might be. Come and show me different. When it says right here, but thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Now there's a time that the end is going to be set in motion. And don't look at the end as though it's just a period of time of 30 years. I'm looking at this last 100 years of American history. Many shall run to and fro. Does that mean people are literally running by foot, scared of something? No. It means there's something going to come into existence that people will travel to and fro. That's why I say the steam engine was the beginning of that era. By the time, brothers and sisters, we come into the latter part of 1700 to the 1800, yes, the ships are now beginning to be propelled by steam. Trains in Europe are running by steam. That's the only, we will say, modern invention and progress they have ever reached to. But now, brothers and sisters, and knowledge shall be increased. Now, saints, let's look at ourselves and let's look at American history. Let's look and see how accurate them words are. The steam engine was already here. Modern transportation. England became the pride of the seas. She begins to build the elaborate ocean liners. The last two that she ever built was the Queen Elizabeth and the Queen Mary. They were her pride and joy. Back at the early beginning of the century, she put together one and she boasted and bragged. Her designer said, we're going to build a ship that can never be sunk. They bragged about how she was designed. The Titanic. What a glorious ship she was built to be. To plow the sea lanes from England to America. And finally the day came. She set sail. And yes, there was all kind of celebration. The wealthy was on it. They were going to take the trip on the ship that couldn't be sunk. Because her builders had bragged how they had designed it. It was impossible. But there was a man that lived in Norway. He had had a vision years beforehand that there would be the building of this ship. And he was showing in his vision that that ship on the high seas would run into a giant iceberg and would sink. He made his way to England to the shipping companies and told them. Would they listen to him? No. Just like our philosophers and politicians and scientists today. Will they listen to us? No. They ain't got time. Their mind's set on some other thing. We can't fool around with this super duper God you're all we're talking about. And after the man did his best to plead with the shipbuilders, be careful, they ignored him. The ship set sail. And yes, in an early morning fog, unbeknownst, they had not radar then. No means of detecting what the object was in front of them. Until all of a sudden, a man on the watch, he cries out a certain word to signal, we will say, the crew to reverse something other. But they're absolutely on course. And they plow into that iceberg. In a matter of minutes, that ship begins to take on water. And in a short period of time, is when the songwriter wrote, it was on one particular morning, just about such and such a time, when that great and mighty Titanic, it began to reel and rock. And on the song goes. And when the people was lined up on deck, some was jumping over into the waters. There didn't seem to be enough of life preservers. Yes, the song went on. And there were husbands and wives and little children lost their lives. It was sad when that great ship went down. I remember as a child, we used to have an old record player. They called them graphophones back then, and we had that on a record. We'd play it once in a while. And my point is tonight, brothers and sisters, we come into the era now. We come pretty close then to 1900. Already a man by the name of Alexander Graham Bell. He's invented the telephone. Little did mankind realize when this man made that little simple apparatus, looked so crude, that you could crank it, it would send out a signal. It operated on a certain type of a battery. That was the beginning of man's fast means of communication. Not only from house to house, but from town to town, and then to cities, and after a while, brothers and sisters, this beginning of the telephone became the fast means that connected government with state governments. It connected nations with other nations. And I can remember, brothers and sisters, when all of your long-distance telephone calls still used to go over the Atlantic underwater cable. In 1968, that's before we had satellite communication, in the month of October when I went to Israel first time, I told the wife when I left, I said, honey, somewhere in this process of time, I'm going to try to call home if I'm able to get through. So in Israel, I told the operator, I said, I'd like for you to put me a call through at a certain time of day. At that time, there was an over-the-Mediterranean cable that your call had to go through first. Then it goes into England, into a switchboard setup. Then that connects you then to the overseas cable into the States. So when the connection is all made, and finally I'm able to speak to my wife, I say, hello, and I'm waiting, seem like a half of a minute before I get the reply back. Hello. So we communicated. Now that was in 68. But brothers and sisters, it was not long after that. We have put up a space satellite, which was the beginning then of bouncing the signals. No longer was the cable going to be used much more. It began to go by that route. Then in the 70s, when we was back in the same Holy Land with different tour groups, we could call home by phone, but now it goes by satellite. Now where did the technology come from? The U.S. America. Think of it. Knowledge shall be increased. It did not come while time and civilization lay in Europe's hands. It come when it lay here. Because God had something this nation was going to be prophetically instrumental in doing. So we'll say the beginning of the telephone. But we was involved in a conflict, World War I and World War II. It brought us into an era where we was faced then of coming more or less out of an agricultural realm into an industrial background. And I want to say this tonight, brothers and sisters. It may sound to you and you that are hook on and so forth that I'm bragging about the United States of America. I am in one sense. I'm bragging about what God has done with her, what He has gave her, what He has fulfilled through her, prophetic-wise, and history will vindicate it every bit. Knowledge has came increased, and we gave the world today what she has to enjoy from the telephone. Sitting right back there is David Funk. His wife, her father, he used to work for a big telephone company. Several years back, he was taken by his company to Saudi Arabia. And there, Saudi Arabia had one of the best telephone systems put in that could be put in at that time. Isn't that right, David? My point in saying that is to say this. Technology has moved. And it lay here. So what do we have? While it's true, England, she was the pride of the maritime fleets of the ocean. But let's look a little bit later. That Queen Elizabeth and Queen Mary sailed the high seas. All through the war era, she hauled soldiers and troops. But when World War II was over, look what has happened. We established for the two first overseas international airline flights in the world, TWA and Pan American. Tell me if there was any others that was competing at that time. All other international flights was on a small margin. But we were sending them wherever they be. So brothers and sisters, it was not long till America was producing some of the fastest, the most modernist commercial airline planes in the world. Go and be anywhere in this world you want to go. Stand in any airport. It don't matter whether it's in Moscow, Tokyo, or Australia or what. 2/3 of the airplanes you'll see sitting there are Boeings or DCs made in the United States of America. We gave the world the fast means of running to and fro. In fact, England parked her ships because the airplane industry took them over. Who wants to travel and spend so many days bobbing up and down on water when they could get in an airplane and be there in a few hours? You see the point? Knowledge shall be increased. And so let us look at America. We gave the world the radar. We gave the world the modern airplane, high-speed transportation. We gave the world the radio. At first it was a crude instrument, but in over a little period of time it became a modern home convenience appliance. Now we can bring Beethoven and his music. We didn't have to spend any fabulous sum to go to an opera house to hear them. We can bring it right in our own log cabins if we wanted to. You understand what I mean? Following that, right on the heels, was the television. It was said by somebody prior to the television, the day would come, that the radio would have a picture tube on top of it. They said, that's hogwash. But it proved, brothers and sisters, it wasn't long till here it was. Now we got the telephone with the little old image right there. Think of it. And I have to say, brothers and sisters, out of America, this new world part, has came the fast flowing of this technology that the world today is enjoying the benefits. We designed the automatic washing machine. When people were standing over the old wash tub in Europe, we was buying automatic washing machines and then dryers. I have to say, scientists, atheists, can you read me any of your book? And knowledge shall be increased. You can study all you want to about Mars and so forth. But we were the nation that put man on the moon. Don't tell me this book is not right, because there's not another book written by men that can be that accurate. And I have to say tonight, it's a shame that modern scientists, educators, have become so blatantly arrogant that they want to destroy the very thing that fulfills prophecy. We've gave to the world. In World War II, we didn't know what a computer was. But by the 60s, they had them on battleships. It's how they fired their guns. But a little bit later, they have modified them. So they take the old ones out and let civilians have them. So they got to playing around with them. And now look what we've got. So we gave the world the computer. And here all over the world tonight, they're looking at this and watching this service by the means of the computer. 50 years ago it was not a soul, but it is tonight. And I don't like to talk about Hollywood and give it any commendation or anything. But while Europe bragged and bloated and gloated about her opera houses, well, outside of walls, we will say, certain opera houses in New York, we never had much of that line to be bragging about. But a few years later, we began to make movies. They were silent at first, but it wasn't long we began to put the voice to them. And by the time, brothers and sisters, we come into the late 30s and 40s and 50s, we was producing movies of all calibers, and they were sending them all over the world. They enjoyed them because they got tired of going and watching actors put on their programs and things on stage. Now they could go and watch it on the screen. That was the beginning. That was an outflowing of more technology. All these things came out of America. Sure, these other nations later, sooner or later, they took certain parts of it and they modified it to fit their own situation. But my point is tonight, America was that little place in the New World wherein this God was going to see to it that this knowledge wouldn't flow. And I can say tonight, when you get in that motor vehicle of yours, well, most of them today ain't an all-American vehicle anyhow. But when we look back at the turn of the century, we had a man by the name of Henry Ford. He designed that Model T, while at that time it was the most modern-looking thing that could possibly have been put together. And he began to manufacture what was called the All-American automobile. When them things began to come onto our country gravel roads, horses was known to have run away, tore up the wagon, tore up the buggy. People got hurt, had to go to the hospital. People got killed even. And some of the preachers back said they ought to get the blankety blank thing off of the road. I had a man to tell me one time in the United Brothers Church. He told me, said, Brother Jackson, he said, I can remember when preachers used to say, you own one of them blankety blank things, you're going to go to hell. Because he said they scared every horse off of the road. They create accidents and all of that. But he says, that generation of preachers died, and the next generation come on church, took the church over, and they're riding on the thing. So I just say that, brothers and sisters, you cannot stop the flow of knowledge. So just take a look, brothers and sisters, whether it's an automatic washer, whether it's a modern automobile, whether it's a commercial airliner, whether it's a modern radio, whether it's a modern television, whether it's a cellular phone, where was it made originally first? Here. Right where knowledge began to flow. Now what does it say in the book of Revelation about this little nation? Let's turn right there to it tonight. And I'm going to stop here just in a little while. Some of the atheists, scientists, politicians, they say, well, the United States is not mentioned in the Bible prophecy. It is. What I'm going to read to you is pointing to the United States of America just as sure as you're sitting here. Because, brothers and sisters, from the first verse of this 13th chapter through the 10th verse, it's talking about the reconstructing of Europe after the close of World War II. And it tells here how this land beast that's seen coming up here is the one that helps to restore it. And brothers and sisters, it happened just exactly like that. And John did not receive this until 96 AD. But the picture that he got was pointing to our 20th century of time. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, not to see where the old Roman system came up out of. And he had two horns like a lamb. So this, characteristically then, was portrayed. This was a Christian-like nation coming up. And he spake as a dragon. When did that happen? As World War II began to close. That's when we get this new brain work coming in. New educators, new philosophy. And brothers and sisters, it is not long. Our political systems are broke down. Our educational systems are broke down. It isn't long now till the brain works of the nation, the leadership category of the nation, the devil has taken over, and now it talks just like the dragon. And he exercised all the power of the first beast. He began to walk right in the same footsteps. Because, brothers and sisters, it was modern America that helped reconstruct and rebuild Europe after the devastation of World War II. Had it not been America that did it, part of Europe would still be laying in ruins today. It would have taken them that long to recover. And it was your tax dollar that was collected, and through the Marshall Aid and the years that followed, that helped reconstruct. And he exercised all the power of the first beast before him, and causes the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast. Now there's a right way to read this. First off, it's in a pictorial sense. You know and I know. When we see this in reality, we're not looking at this animal. He's just come up out of a hole in the earth somewhere, and he's out here talking, making plans, and telling everybody on the whole world, now you worship that other beast. You don't see that. You have to view and understand. It's the influence that this Western, we will say, nation, that has become an economical power and a scientific, technological power that helped to reconstruct Europe. It's her influence that she's had over, we will say, certain areas of the earth that causes them to really worship the first beast that had to be constructed. Now I'm going to hurry up in reading this. And he does great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. World War II brought America to an hour of crisis. From Pearl Harbor, we had lost much of the pride of our fleet, but God, by His grace, gave America the technology to rebuild and reconstruct, so that by the time World War II was coming to close, we have rebuilt these ships and many more. But watch. We've had to fight the Japanese practically on every major island network throughout the Pacific. The President and our military knew to try to carry this war to the shores of Japan, we would lose countless thousands of men, because the Japanese could see now they were losing it foot control by foot control. But she was planning absolutely, brothers and sisters, we will say, to die like fanatics if America had ever landed on the shores. MacArthur had said to the President, give me a weapon. And we had invented the atomic bomb. At that time, the atomic bomb, I have not saw it. I've read a little bit about it. It was very much a crude thing in comparison to the modern type bombs we have today that can be sent by, we will say, all kinds of rockets and stuff. But the fact, brothers and sisters, we carry that thing over there, and we hit one city by the name of Nagasaki. And then we hit another a few days later by the name of Hiroshima. One bomb devastated an entire city. Which other conventional bombs, it would take plane load after plane load after plane load and days on end to eventually have done that much destruction. But these two cities laying in ruins and hundreds of thousands of Japanese, it's them that's paying the death toll, not the American soldier landing. And I'll have to say, these hypocrites in America today who said we was wrong by dropping the atomic bomb, you ought to be shipped out of here. You weren't at Pearl Harbor. The Japs cared less how many civilians we had that was killed in the streets when the Jap planes came in. But we've got a bunch of people in America today, they don't even realize how fortunate they've had it. They ought to ship them to Africa somewhere where they've never had the, we will say, access to the material benefits of life. But nevertheless, by the dropping of these two bombs, Japan was ready to surrender. And the war came to a close. Yes, this beast had the scientific knowledge. This is not, and how it's been preached by some of our so-called prophetic preachers of Protestant denominationalism, that this is some man out here got hocus-pocus powers to call fire out of heaven. That's not the picture at all. This was absolutely this land beast that God has saw to it that He gave her the technology, the knowledge to know how to harness this atomic thing and to use it, and it brought devastating fire from heaven because it was dropped from an airplane, and it shook the world. It brought the war to a close. And I have to say, brothers and sisters, it's been since the close of World War II that God has saw that all these other high-tech knowledge of the advancement of science and stuff has flowed through this nation. When it comes to the thing of television, it's invented by, we will say, our own electrical men that have been manufactured and designed in radios. But in order for them to help Japan to recover, yes, General MacArthur, he wanted America to send some of her production stuff over there. So it is not long that over in Japan, in different places, little factories have been set up. They send the plans and so forth of certain type of radios. They send it to Japan. They're doing it to help her out economically. Well, brothers and sisters, it's not long as she begins to build little radio sets, then little television sets. It's not long now, brothers and sisters, till these little Japanese, they come over here and they go through our plants, and they're snapping pictures like everything. And they go back home, and they set up their own little shops. And brother, it isn't long. They're setting out televisions. And now then, go into, we will say, appliance place today. How many TVs do you find that's made in America? Think about it. You don't find hardly any. But the mother of them all was designed here. Don't forget that. All because, why is it that way? All because, for some reason or other, our labor has so been harnessed that if they're produced here, it would probably cost you about 3 times as much as you pay for it when it's manufactured in Japan. And I say that not to cast off or anything. When World War II came, America and England had the 2 best type of motorcycles there was on the face of this earth. The Harley Davidson, and the English, they had one that was almost comparative to it. But in order to help the Japanese out, and now, brothers and sisters, yes, we helped them. But now then, the Yamaha, the Honda, and they produce motorcycles by the carloads. But you know what? We still produce the Harley Davidson. But now in Japan, they still like that American Harley Davidson. And I saw on the news report about that a few months back. In Japan, there's a club over there. That's all they ride. Here's the Honda, the Yamaha, and all of these others that they put together over there. But my point is this, brothers and sisters. Where did they get the original plans and stuff? It's from America. Now, no matter how you look at it, it's from this country. God so too that He blessed this nation. This is where knowledge has flowed. We ought to be thanking God for it. But here we got people in America today. They have become so anti-American. They'd like to tear it to pieces. And I'll have to say, yes, in all probability, some of it is going to get tore up. It's not the way they want to do it, but it's how God's going to clean some house on some things. Now, I want to finish this here, but I want to show you. This Lamb beast, He doth great wonders, so that He maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. He has the scientific technology, and through the flow of knowledge God has sent. This is why I have to say, scientists. I can accept certain things that scientists put together, because behind all of that, there is a mastermind that is the scientist of all. That's God Himself. He knows all about chemistry. He knows the basis of every chemical that is in the universe. So He knows how to impart to a mental mind how to put certain things together to produce a product that's beneficial to mankind. And that's why I have to say tonight, Daniel's prophecy hit it right exact. That's why the prophecy is part of the infallibility of God's Word. It didn't come through Europe. It came from this new country. And she's that Lamb country. Now, I'm going to close here. And He makes fire come down out of heaven. Ever since the close of World War II, we have been instrumental in designing different types of fighter planes. We've been involved in Korea. We've been involved in Vietnam. We was involved in a Gulf War. In the war between Vietnam and that hour, we have scientifically put together different types of, we will say, rocketry, bombs. And the other day they showed we now have put together a drone airplane. It don't even have a man in it. In this drone airplane, it can fly 13 miles up. There ain't no any aircraft gun can reach it. And brothers and sisters, it's got all the most modernist technology of sights, X-rays, radar. It can pick out a spot on the ground. I forget what they said in size. It can fly, not even the cloud formations under it, even stops it from seeing through. And the plane can stay up for a day and a half. If it does for some reason reach an accident, at least there's no human life lost in it. But it shows how that plane can fly. And they can control it from right here in the United States. And the thing, when it goes up, it stays up for a day and a half. And it can fly over an area, and it sends back these pictures, these photographs, spotting every entrance to a cave. Yesterday morning, they was interviewing a retired major of the U.S. Rangers. And he said, with this type of equipment, he says, them caves cannot be hid from that type of a plane. He says it x-rays that. It shows the whole internal designs of these cave complexes they've got over there. He says, we've got another drone type plane that carries 2 missiles. He says, we could cause it to fire them missiles right in the entrance to that. He said, if they find the actual cave that bin Laden is in, he said, if they want to bring it into it right quick, all they have to do is just release one of these bombs. And that bomb is so designed, it could go right in the entrance of that thing and go in through the tunnel, and it's in there a good way before it explodes. And when it explodes, it causes the whole internal structure of this cave to utterly collapse. He says, you've put him in an eternal tomb for the rest of his life. When I heard that, I said to myself, this is none other than what that lamb beast has been scientific allowed to produce. Because in actuality, those caves, those tunnels cannot be hid. I saw in the Gulf War how when they found out some of these bunkers where these Iraqi troops was at, especially that 450 that I saw coming out that particular morning, certain amount of heat is generated from the human body. These sites picks that up. Then they can see this mound of dirt. But after a while, then they can make out here is a certain place that's got to be the entrance. And they've got certain type of rockets, brothers and sisters, and it showed how on one of them they sent that rocket right straight through the front door of that bunker. It just blows everything to pieces. Then in the city of Baghdad, in one of the communication headquarters, they knew that that headquarters was in a large building over there, and here is the elevator shaft up the top. They went over and they sent one of them rockets right straight down that elevator shaft, right into that great big building. I have to say, whether the atheists, the evolutionists don't like it or not, you'll have to admit you live in a country that's been blessed by God. God has gave her technology to help protect her. But it's a sad thing that America, from her intellectual, her politicians, she's sold out to the devil. And I have to say, there's a certain element of people in America going to pay for this. They don't realize it now. But before this whole thing's all over, America is going to be faced with a house cleaning. Now, I'm going to bring this part of my message to a close. But this actually took place in a restaurant. Claudine gave it to me tonight. It came in off of the email. Is that right, Claudine? It took place right here in America. I arrived in Moscow, Idaho, home of Idaho University, 1 block from Best Western Motel, and went to dinner at Best Western. About 85 to 100 people were in the restaurant. I'm at a table for about 5 minutes when this group comes in, 20 people. They have anti-war picket signs with them. It appears that two of these demonstrators are professors. They all sat down at a large round table behind me and began to talk very loudly about U.S. atrocities in Afghanistan. One of the professors stands up and gives a brief talk about how the U.S. is famous for atrocities. And Afghanistan will be no different. One of the students asks a question about Vietnam POWs. The professor makes a comment about how that was only U.S. propaganda and about poor treatment of POWs. Okay, I'm really mad now. This is a true soldier. And I jump up and go over to their table. In regards, over to the entrance of the restaurant is a huge American flag. On each table is an American flag and a small hand-picked sign, painted sign, United We Stand. I excuse myself and ask the professor if I can ask him a question. He says yes. I said that he appears to be of age to have served in Vietnam and asked him if he had served. The answer was no. I defended this campus and told the truth to the students. I then asked if he remembered what he was doing on February the 16th, 1969. When he answered, of course not. That was too long ago. I responded, really? I remember what I was doing. That was the second day of my capture, and I had been standing in a bamboo cage for 24 hours with water up to my chest. I then said, sir, your comments about how POs in Vietnam were treated are a lie. And I personally say to you, you are a liar, as you never were there. I was a POW, and they did not treat our POs humanly. The only other person I have ever heard make the statements like you have is Jane Fonda. Is she telling the truth and not me? He stood up and about after 10 seconds said, Jane is a great patriot and I cannot visualize her lying. With that, I reached over and grabbed this small American flag and United We Stand sign and said, I'm taking this back to my table where it can be appreciated. So he takes it off of that table. No one said a word to me as I started to walk back. However, after a few seconds, people started standing up and applauding all over the restaurant. 2 men got up from a table across the room and walked over to me. The first identified himself as a former U.S. Marine Lieutenant Flynn, and the other man was former Gunnery Sergeant Grabosi. In a loud voice, after introducing themselves, Lieutenant Flynn said, they were former Marine guards at a U.S. embassy. He then said, we are over at the table to defend the U.S. flag from all foes, both foreign and domestic. They then sat down and asked the waitress to bring their meals over to my table. A few more minutes went by with loud comments from an anti-war table. All of a sudden, Gunny Sergeant Gabreski stood up and in a loud voice said, all of you heard what the president said the other night. You are either with the United States or you are with the terrorists. He said then, please stand and join me in God Bless America. As he started singing, people around the restaurant stood up and joined in. Several of the students at the anti-war table also stood up halfway through the song and joined in. Both professors and the majority of the students remained seated and refused to sing. At the end, there was a great ovation. The manager came to my table, he and his staff, and came from the kitchen and sang. He thanked me for what I started, and then went over to the anti-war table and asked them to leave. I will pay for what you have had so far, but I cannot in good conscience serve you. Get out of here. One of the professors then made a remark, well, we are not going to pay one dime for how shabby we have been treated. As they were leaving, one customer stood up and said, Manager, here's $5 toward their bill. Anyone else willing to chip in to get this scum out of here? All over the restaurant, people stood up and reaching for their wallet and said, I'll chip in. The manager, in tears, said, my family is from Poland. I am now a citizen, and I'm proud of what I see tonight. He started crying, and a couple of the waitresses helped him into the kitchen. The two Marines and I were there for about another 20 minutes and finished our meal. The hostess came up and showed us more than $100 that all the other tables had told their waitresses to give towards our bill. I thanked her but said I could not take the money. Lieutenant Flynn suggested donating it in the restaurant's name to the New York Relief Fund, so I guess that's what will happen. I just can't believe how Americans are coming together now. Just thought you would like to hear how the rest of this country is reacting to what happened. Joe Von Potter. I have to say, praise the Lord. And before it's all over, we'll probably hear much more like this, brothers and sisters. So God bless you tonight. I don't